would you just give a really warm pathway welcome to my friend, Robin Wood?
Thank you. You're awesome, man. You're awesome. Totally awesome. Wow, I get energized every time I walk in this place. And listen, I've already told you this about your pastor, but God gave me kind of a very tough assessment process. I don't know if you know this, but 50% of all church plants fail. And if that happens, you lose like $300,000 to $400,000. And I'm not criticizing that, but so God gave me this tough assessment. And I just want you to know your pastor has assessed out of 89 pastors that I've planted with in the top 3 ever. Come on, give it up for that. God is awesome. God is awesome. Now, I'm gonna teach you 2 phrases today that I just want you to say. I'm kind of known around the country for, hey, well, he's got one phrase at least that sticks in our head, and one of them I wrote the book about. It's called What Are the Odds? But every time today I open my hands like this in a real sarcastic way, so I got to see your practice here. I want you to say, what are the odds? Okay, almost like you don't believe it. Ready? What are the odds? Oh, you guys are amazing. I'm not going to come to the first service anymore. This is awesome. Just come to the second. Ready? Come on. What are the odds? You guys are amazing. All right. Now, the second one is, and God gave me this for this service, is I prepared and I've watched this church. And like I told you, you guys, we have never seen this kind of momentum in a town under 20,000 people. And I think, what are we at, 14,000 or something? We have never seen the explosive growth and conversions and baptism. We've just never seen it. And we've had some remarkable stories that you're going to hear today, including ours starting in Phoenix, and now we're in Cape Coral, and we're in Sarasota in a Russian church plant. Some amazing what are the odds stories, but we have never seen what's happening here in Marietta. And so I'm going to teach you this phrase. I want you to say, God's doing it again. Say it with me. Ready? God's doing it again. Yeah, you can clap for that too. God is doing it again. All right? So I want you to plug that in your spirit, okay? And so I begin just telling you, if you don't know me, in 1987, I was only 34 years old. My kids were 7, 3.5, and 18 months. Okay, I got sent to Phoenix, Arizona. I agreed to plant a church. And I'd never done that. By the way, I had preached 6 times in my life. Come on, that's... just come on, a little more energy, ready? What are the odds? And I went to Phoenix, and I can't even tell you, I was overwhelmed. I met with 90 people to share the vision, which I know Ryan started meeting with people together, what we call a launch team. I met with 90 people. I remember saying to my wife, it looks we could have a core team of 80 or 90 people. So you want the real good news right up front? 6 people said, we'd like to do that. Come on, people. Only 6 believed the dream. And I was overwhelmed. I thought, what are we going to do? And we went to a conference with 800 pastors in Anderson, Indiana, where I went to college. 800 pastors. And they had a guy named Norm Wan who shared the phones for you concept. And he was teaching how you could make 20,000 phone calls and invite people to church. He got saved as a telemarketer, and so he thought God could use him that way, and God did. Now listen, all the lights were off. They showed a video of a church that had 200 people the first Sunday that made 20,000 phone calls. When they turned the lights on, I was in tears. I had my credit card out to buy that program for $299, and I looked around, and everybody else was laughing. Then they took a break, and everybody was making fun of it. What are the odds? But you know what? I bought that program, and I went to Phoenix, Arizona. And I was thinking I might have 90 phone callers, and then I had 6. What are the odds? I had 6, but we made 23,000 phone calls in 6 weeks. We simply asked 2 questions. Are you actively involved in the church? Notice we didn't say, do you have a church home? Everybody says they have a church home. They don't go. Come on, enjoy that. But we have a church home. But we said, are you actively involved? And they would somewhat say, no. And we just simply say, look, no pressure. Could we send you an invitation to our first service? That's how simple it was. Look at me, people. We sent over 2,300 families an invitation to that first service. And on opening day, October 18th, 1987, never forget it, we had 305 people show up. Now, you know God's in it. Go, you can clap for that. That's awesome. It's still like it happened yesterday. But you just have to laugh because God does have humor. I said, God must be in this, because who could start a church at a school Pueblo Middle School with the initials PMS. Come on, people, enjoy it. So we PMS that morning, then we PMS for 3.5 years, and we doubled there. But here's the deal. On that opening Sunday, I love the front row people. By the way, you three should try out for the music team. You have an incredible voice. Come on, give it up for this front row. They can sing, man. Awesome. But listen, that first Sunday, 13 people stood and received Christ. And I would always use the phrase, is it your time? Is today your time? I did that for 18 years, every Sunday. Warmly, I didn't, not heavy pressure, not a hard push. Is this your time to ask Jesus to be in your life? The reason that's so important to me is because, when Ryan mentions the story about Neville Tan, Paul T. and Linda T. showed up that first service for 305 people. I recognized them. They were Oriental, and so I could tell they were probably Asian, and I just took a guess at that. Found out later they were from Malaysia. He was there with Intel. He'd been transferred from Penang into Phoenix. Now, I only visited, we made 23,000 phone calls. I couldn't visit homes, but I decided to go to their house and meet them. And so I met Paul and Linda T. after I met them that first morning. And Paul let me know, as blunt as possible, I don't go to church. And I thought, well, you showed up at the first Sunday. He goes, I go one time. Somebody say one time. One time. I go one time to make sure my wife is safe and my two precious kids, Derek and Cherish. He made it clear. He said, so don't invite me. And he meant it. And I never did. I honored that. I knew him for 3 years. She came every Sunday. He never, because he only goes one time. And I'll never forget, before they left to go back, she decided to get baptized. We did that at houses then. So he showed up at the house for her baptism. And I said, look, Paul, I've honored what you asked me. I'll never be pushy. What would it take, Paul, for you to ever give your life to Christ? And he goes, well, first of all, I hate the phrase, is this your time? Come on, I use it. I go, why do you hate that phrase? My mother used to say that to me. Is this your time, Paul? Are you ever going to surrender your life to God? She used that phrase. So I used it the first Sunday. So he was sure he wasn't going to, come on, what are the odds? I said, what are the odds? So I said, okay, I understand that. I said, but hey, what would it take? He said, something big. Now listen, you'll never know why God puts thoughts in your mind, but trust him. I said, Paul, I only know I don't really know him, but my father-in-law, who's the head of the missions in our church denomination, I said, my father-in-law knows one person in Asia. He told me his name was Neville Tan. And he told me about Neville Tan. And so this guy got released from prison and started churches over in Asia. And so if you ever, listen, Paul, if you ever meet Neville Tan, you'll know God chased you around. That's what I said to him. Chased you around the world to save your soul. That's how much he cares. That's what I said to him. So he said, well, where's Neville Tan from? I said, Nepal. And guess what he said? That's what I like about you white pastors. You haven't had the globe out lately. Come on. What are the odds? He said, I'm from Malaysia, if you didn't listen, from Penang, a town of 2 million. Nepal's above India, for those of you who have the globe out. Nepal's above India. And I said, well then, listen to me, Paul. If you ever meet him, you'll know God chased you around the world. So you guys, they left. 6 weeks later, I get an airmail from Linda T. She was in a marketplace one day. She was missing Mountain Park. She was telling a woman she was shopping with, I miss my church. We did this great worship team like you had today. We had drama. We had all kinds of creative things. And she said, and I miss my crazy pastor. Come on, what are the odds? She missed me. And she said, I just miss my church. And this woman said, it sounds a lot like our church. We have a great band and contemporary worship. Maybe you could come. So she decided to pick her up. And guess how many times does Paul T go to church? One time. Come say it with me, one time. One time. So Paul went that Sunday to this church, just a couple hundred people. In fact, they had gone through a split that had some disagreements over the Holy Spirit. Never argue over the Holy Spirit, but they did. And so they split over this. And so the church had fallen in half. They were looking for a new pastor. And so the gentleman got up, like Ryan did. They gave the announcements, but he wasn't the pastor, and said, hey, if it's your first Sunday, we welcome you here. And we're going through some changes, but we hope you stay with us. It's a great group of people, and we're praying that God will bring us a pastor. But my best news in the world today is we have a guest speaker from Nepal. You want to say it with me? Whose name is Neville Tan. Come on, somebody shout. What are the odds? Listen, Paul's an engineer, and he started shaking on the front row to the point he fell to his knees and he started crawling to the front saying, Robin Wood, because he talked to me about this, Neville Tan. And Neville said what was going through his head was, I think they split over barking like dogs. Come on, you guys know that. You know the Toronto revival. That's what he thought. And all of a sudden, Linda went forward and told the story of what I had said to Paul. If you ever meet Neville Tan, you'll know God chased you around the world. Little to be known, Neville Tan would lead him to Christ in that service. They would baptize him. The place would come apart. Over 100 people came forward. Neville stayed and pastored that church for 2 years, and they grew to 1,000 people. Somebody shout, what are the odds? I'll tell you the odds. With God, 100%. I look back and say, God, you placed those words. I never met Neville Tan. I was told about him. I had never said his name for 8 years, people. I learned his name at age 25. It was actually 9 years. And then God did what he did. Now, that story electrified our church, I need to tell you. Now, in the early days, there were 2 or 3 other stories that totally transformed us. The first one was the first Christmas. We were like you guys. We started with a few hundred people, remember? But then I preached, so we were down to 120. Come on, enjoy that. But hey, I gave it my best. And then a woman came up to me. I hope these stories happen over and over here. Diane Potter. I'll never forget Diane. She said, Pastor, she said the 2 magical phrases. I want us to do a special missions project for Christmas called Angel Tree, where you buy gifts for prisoners' kids. Most of us have heard about that now. But the Chuck Colson ministry across the nation, back in the early 90s and in the late 80s, it was exploding. You buy gifts for prisoners' kids and deliver it to the moms at home and to the kids. And she said the other magical phrase, now hear it clearly, Pastor, I'm not going to ask you to do it. I'm not going to ask you to get up and push it. You let me set up a tree and I'll rally the people. You know how emotional that is to me. She put up 25 angels for the first week. Then we needed 25 more. So the first year, she encouraged us to pick kids that were our age of our kids. So I had kids 7.5, 3.5, and 18 months. So we picked 3 kids out. We went to Guadalupe. We had the 6 gifts for the 3 kids. Now look at me. But there weren't 3 kids at that house. There were 9. And there wasn't one mother with a husband in prison. There were 3. And we fell apart. My wife and I fell apart. And so we said, we'll need to come back, and we will. We promise you. So we left those gifts, and then we brought back an interpreter in Spanish because they weren't inviting us in. We thought it was a language barrier, but they didn't invite us in because the place was just a wreck. They had no money. There was no electricity in the place. And it gets cold in Phoenix in December. Come on, I was just there. It was down to 38, whatever. But we went in that house. There were no window coverings. There were no mattresses for the kids. They were sleeping on blankets. The stove had one burner. It was a natural gas stove. They had one burner that worked. And then the refrigerator was out on the porch. It didn't work. And so God laid on my heart to get up the next Sunday and not preach. Come on, give it up. I didn't preach. What are the odds? Somebody shout, what are the odds? And I read from 1 John, not the gospel. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. If anyone sees his brother or sister in need and closes up his heart, how can the love of God be in him? Now, I didn't expect this to happen, but I read the list of needs. There were like 35 that we identified about the stove and the refrigerator and the beds and the window coverings and electricity. And without ever asking, I mentioned 2 teenagers there, all the way down from 14, 15, all the way down to babies. 2 of the babies were sick. And all of a sudden, Jan, who was the first lady I ever led to Christ at Mountain Park, she became our hairdresser. She said, you tell those young teenage girls I'll do their hair. Listen to this, the rest of their life. And she did. And then Dr. Turner stood up. I'll never forget this. He said, you have those babies in my office Monday morning. And he served them the rest of their life. And then people started standing and said, I've got a stove in my garage. Come on, you got extra stoves out there. You got refrigerators in your, some of us have 3 refrigerators. And people say, I've got a refrigerator to give. It's brand new. And then this was happening all over. A crowd just like this. I'll never forget, we had about 100, 150 adults, whatever. And they just started standing and say, I can do this. Vince stood. Vince had never been in church. He said, I'm an electrician. I will go out today and I'll get that house wired up. And he did. And then all of a sudden, all these people were standing. We were crying. This place was coming apart. And I wasn't preaching. Come on, what are the odds? What are the odds? And then on the back row, this lady that I just got to know, her kids had been coming that I knew from Wyoming. And Mrs. Garland stood. And she was just weeping. And she said, you know, I'm a Catholic. I haven't been in church for years. And she said, I don't have any of the things you're talking about. Then she held up her hand. She had a check. She goes, but I've got money. Come on, people. Come on, the place came apart. We all started cheering. She goes, I got $5,000 and more where this came from. Listen, that lady became our biggest giver. Listen, isn't that what God does? Come on, shout. What are the odds? And God's doing it again. But here's what really moves me. God starts using just regular people like us. And then if you read the Bible, then he finds people that are far from him. The Zacchaeus stories of the world. The Nicodemus stories that come at night. And so if you'll throw up for me on the overhead, Jesus entered Jericho one day. We were told there was this guy by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. He was wealthy. Listen what it tells us about him. He wanted to see Jesus, but because he was short, he couldn't see him. So he went and he climbed up in a tree, and he wanted to see Jesus. So when he climbed up into that fig tree, Jesus was coming by. What are the odds? Somebody shout, what are the odds? What are the odds? He would stop right in front of Zacchaeus. Everyone else hated him, but Jesus saw him in that tree. Now, to really enjoy this story, you got to read the Bible with creativity. Zacchaeus was like Danny DeVito in a robe. Come on, people. You got to picture that. He hated himself. He got money the wrong way. He had to stand up on a kid's little stool in his bathroom just to shave. Come on, you got to picture all that. Danny DeVito in a robe. And Jesus stopped and said, hey, Zacchaeus, I'm going to your house today. And everybody began to mutter, he's going to a sinner's house. He's going to a tax collector. They hated him. And see, they never understood Jesus. But Jesus went, and listen what happened. Whatever conversation they had, whatever happened, he recognized that Jesus was the Son of God. And listen what he said. Lord, here and now. Look, it went from Lord, here and now, I give half of my possessions. And if I've cheated anybody of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today, salvation has come to this house. For the Son of Man has come to seek and save that which was lost. What are the odds? Now listen, I wasn't the best young preacher. You know, I finally went on to get my master's of divinity. I did my best to be true to the text like I am today. Jesus tied this incredible conversion experience that his entire life was transformed, and he tied it to money because this guy had given his life over to money and thought that was going to deliver, but he was unhappy. He hated himself. He had a short man syndrome. He had all kinds of problems. Only Jesus can fill that void in your life. And if you don't believe it, and I'm not taking a cheap shot at this, but you can win a bunch of NFL championships and end up in a spa in Florida. Come on, people. I read the paper. You can have all the money in the world. You can have all the championships, and it will lead you to try to fill that hole in your heart in a wrong way. Come on, you know I'm telling the truth. Only Jesus can fill that hole in your heart. And here's the deal. I would preach these kinds of things. I was an adrenaline addict, and I would tell my story. And some people would receive how I was healed from that. And I was a workaholic, and sugar was my drug of choice. Don't laugh at that, because, listen, Joyce Meyer helped me this morning. I'm no longer going to say sugar is my drug. It is, but I'm going to deny it. I'm going to say, Lord, I could be free from that. She helped me this morning. But here's the deal. I would share my story. Now, had a man that would come now and then. I knew Linda and Jerry Crawford. I didn't know them well. But Linda came all the time, and she was very big help in the church. She was like Diane Potter. They really took care of everything in the church. Never got to know Jerry very well. And one day, he asked me to come to lunch. And I'd preached about Zacchaeus, and I'd preached about people that were far from God. And even ate, and I'd tell the C.S. Lewis stories that Jesus would, he was either the Lord or a liar or a lunatic. You know, I tell all those stories. And Jerry went to lunch with me one day, and he said, you know, I've never booked lunch with you. He said, I don't want to hurt you, but I've come for 3 years until recently, and you haven't made any sense to me. Come on, that's a good way to start lunch. When I ate with Jerry, he said, Robin, you told that C.S. Lewis thing, because he said, I'm an agnostic. I consider myself an atheist. But he said, you told where C.S. Lewis was the same way. And he said, he finally realized that Jesus was either who he said he was, the Lord, or he was a liar or a lunatic. You know, he was crazy and thought he was. That's a powerful thought. And that morning, he prayed to receive Christ. So he takes me to lunch. He makes me laugh about myself. And then he asks me if I'll disciple him. So in those days, I was pointing my new believers to the Gospel of Luke because it's chronological in the stories. It takes us right from Jesus' ministry all the way through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so he was reading through Luke, and one day he calls me. Ready? Ready for the phone call? Okay, Robin, what's up with Zacchaeus? Come on, enjoy this. Come on, I got the text up there. I didn't correct him. I said, hey, that'd be Zacchaeus. No. I said, yeah, we call him Zach. Come on, I made that up on the spot. That's awesome. I said, yeah, what's up with Zacchaeus? And he said, well, did he really do what Jesus said he did? I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, he climbed the tree. They went to, he said, yeah, it says he gave half of his possessions, and then he paid back people that he cheated. And I said, you know what, Jerry? I'm going to teach you this about the Bible. Some of the stories are poetic, some of them are allegory, but when Jesus told a true story, it's probably exactly how it happened. So 2 weeks later, our CPA walks into my office and says, I'm a little confused because Jerry and Linda Crawford made a pledge of about $30,000, but he just gave stock from Intel that's way over $360,000. And she says to me, I think it's a mistake. And with my great faith, I go, yeah, that's a mistake. Come on, what are the odds? What are the odds? And I said, now, Laura, you're going to have to call Jerry now. You're not allowed to tell me what people do. You got to tell him you made a mistake, but you were confused, and ask him, did he mean to do whatever you think he did? Because she said, I kept running the calculator. So you ready? She comes back in about 10 minutes and says, he told me you'd know exactly what he did because he talked to you about Zacchaeus. What are the odds? And so guess what Laura said to me? Who's Zacchaeus? Come on, people. She's a Christian. She doesn't know who he is. I said, Zacchaeus. I said, look at me, Laura. He just gave half of his wealth. She went back, ran the numbers again, and it was $420,000. If you follow the Intel stock, the stock letters are INTC, you'll know in the 90s, it peaked out at $162. Went to 168. We sold it at the top number. It came all the way back during the recession in 2008 and 9. Came all the way back to $14. I was with Jerry just about a month ago. He said to me, Robin, I never told you the end of all this story. But he said, I cast all my stock out back when I gave half of it to the church. And he said, let me tell you something. I kept the other in cash because my kids were going to college. I bought back 2 times the amount of stock at $14. And if you look at where the close was Friday, Intel's back to $52. Somebody say, what are the odds? What are the odds? What are the odds God would use a Zacchaeus story to change the life of someone who was sat in front of me where I couldn't get through to him? There's one other great story that's about Zacchaeus. There's a man by the name of Conley Wolfswinkle in our city. We started looking for land, like you guys are starting right now to look, okay? So I want you to begin to pray that God would use somebody, whether it's a Zacchaeus of Marietta or somebody else, to help you find that land. So we started praying. I'll never forget. When we started looking for land was $200,000 an acre in Phoenix. We made our first offer at $1.8 million and had no money in the bank. We were laughing at ourselves. Someone outbid us, or we don't know what we would have done. We were like a dog who catches a car and says, what do I do now? Come on. We didn't know what to do. But here's the deal. We didn't get that bid. And I met this Conley Wolfswinkle. You can do the research on him. He was the biggest land development person in Phoenix. He told me he didn't like pastors. He didn't like me. He was a crude guy. He was not a Zacchaeus looking for Jesus up a tree, man. He didn't care. But his wife, Bernadette, came to Mountain Park a couple times, and she liked us. And so we finally invited him to a special service. I went to college with Sandy Patty. She came out and did a special concert for Mountain Park, and we invited Conley. And he was impressed. She was talented, so he was impressed with her. But he just didn't like pastors. And I said, Conley, someday I got to find land. He said, well, if I ever find a contact, I'll call you, and I'll try to help you. Well, here's the deal. During all this time at Mountain Park, we were looking for land. Different things would happen. I'd go see Jan, remember the hairdresser that helped us do all these kids here? We were taking care of the poor. We became the largest Chuck Colson ministry in all of Phoenix, and we were not the largest church, but we served more children. I recruited 5 dentists, and we had like 3 doctors, and we took care of it because Chuck Colson wasn't trying to get us to buy gifts for Christmas. He was trying to help us invite people into our lives. And so amazing things were happening. And then Jan, I was going to get my hair cut one day, and she said, I got a real tough thing to ask you, but I need you to do this. She said, after I cut your hair today, I need you to go to the hospital. My best friend, Rebecca, her baby died at birth today, and I need you to serve them. And I go, oh, Jan, this is overwhelming. And I remember meeting Dave and Rebecca, and then little Paige, and I held her. It was tough. It's the first child funeral I'd ever done. And they weren't Christians, and this didn't help them this helped them doubt God. And so I did that memorial. But God showed me that text where Jesus one day gave a son back to his mother that had died. And after it says, this is how it will be in the kingdom. And I remember with tears streaming down my face saying, someday in the kingdom of God, God's going to give back your little girl. And I believe that because in the kingdom, God's going to have the final say and make everything right. And we became friends. Now, they didn't rush to the church because they had so many doubts, but I started eating with Dave. And so we'd have lunch about once a month. And he wasn't even close to God. But this one day, we'd been having better and better conversations, and he actually booked me for lunch and said, I want to talk to you about what it means to know God personally. So I met him at the restaurant, and my cell phone rang, and it was Conley. And as warm as I could, Conley said, I need you to come to my office right now. And I said, Conley, I can't come. I said, I'm at a lunch. And I'm standing in front of Dave. I can't bring up why I can't come, and that, his little girl died. And so on the phone, he said, all of you pastors are stupid. You're just idiots. And he hung up, And so Dave said, it sounds to me, someone was yelling at you. Do you need to go? I go, no, I don't need to go. And so he called me a phrase on the phone that was pretty vulgar, okay? He called me a dumb, you can fill in the blank. It actually starts with an S, ends with a T. There's a big high in the middle, okay? That's what he called me. And so I had lunch, and look at me, people. Now and then, I understand the anger that we can have that kind of is righteous. I can understand the day Peter cut that soldier's ear off. I can imagine Jesus saying, I didn't think I was going to have to heal an ear today, Peter. Try to hold it together. But let me just tell you, when I got to Conley's office, I walked right to his desk. I pointed my finger at him. I said, look, I'm not a dumb, and I said the word. Listen, before I was a Christian, I thought swear words were verbs. I just resurrected it for one day. Come on, people. One day. I said, I'm not that. I said, that's what you are. That's what I told him. I said, I'm not going to leave a man whose baby died, who I just did her funeral. And I said, Conley, you don't get anything. You can hate pastors. You can make fun of God the rest of your life. But you're the dumb. And I said it. And I wasn't proud of myself. And I turned around to walk out. And all of a sudden, I heard the word stop. And I was a little nervous, already shaking. I stopped. Somebody say, what are the odds? Give me a little courage here. And I turned around, and Conley had tears coming down his face. And he said, are you telling me you wouldn't leave that lunch because that little girl died? He said, my son died when he was 9 years old, and I didn't know a pastor like you. And he said, I will help you get that land. Come on, someone shout, what are the odds? And you know what? God is doing it again. Say that with me. God is doing it again. God will continue to choose churches like this who care only about broken people and lost people and broken marriages. You know, come on, that's why you're here. You can trust Ryan. He gets it. He's not going to hurt you. He's going to tell you the good news of Jesus every week and the power of God's restoring power. And that's what's going to happen. Now, I have one more story to tell you, and that is Mike and Karen. They were our neighbors. We thought they'd never come to church. And then my wife's father came to speak at our church one time, and I talked him into coming. It was a Faith Promise Sunday. I don't know if you know what Faith Promise is. It's different than a capital campaign, but you promise to give money to missions that you don't have. That's kind of nice. If God gives it to you, you'll pass it on. That's kind of cool, isn't it? So Mike came, but again, Mike was real resistant and kind of considered himself agnostic and atheist. And so he was not receptive to what my father-in-law taught. On the way home, he made fun of it. My father-in-law had said, maybe you can go home with your spouse and go in different rooms and write down a number after you pray and see if it's the same number. And so he made fun of that all the way home. And Karen said, Mike, you don't have to be rude to Karma's dad. He just said a nice thing. And I know you don't pray, so you're not going to go in a room and pray. So she goes, let me just make a deal with you. I'll go pray in a room, and you go think and be as sarcastic as you want, but write a number down. Come on, people. What are the odds? So he just was all put out, but he said, okay, I'll do that. Well, he went in that room. He told us later. I said, I can't write down an even number. She might get lucky. Come on, people. That's funny. So he said, I can't put 1,000 down or 500 or 1,500. So he wrote down $1,750. He wasn't sarcastic enough to put 58 cents, but he put $1,750. That's not an easy number. She walked out of the room. They both had their piece of paper. Are you ready? You know where I'm going. Say, what are the odds? What are the odds? She had written down $1,750. Because God whispered in her heart, say, she prayed. Don't worry. He didn't respond. He got mad and left the house. The next Monday, he went to work at Intel because he's an engineer. And he went to his desk. And there was an envelope. And next to it was a note from his boss. We misfigured your raise. Listen, he said, I was even nervous to open the envelope. But you know what happened, don't you? You want to say it with me? He opened it. Say it with me. $1,750. He started to cry. He never cries. He went to the restroom, tried to clean himself up. He tried to pull himself together. He didn't want anybody to see him like this. He wrote a note to his secretary when she was away from her desk. I went home sick. And he drove right to my front door. And I was out of town. My wife said, I quoted every verse you ever taught me about evangelism. And she led Mike to Christ. Somebody shout, what are the odds? Listen, it's transformed our church. Mike and Karen gave their life to Christ. And they told this story. And it flooded through our church. And then we came to the moment you're at right now. We had to get land. We'd been in a school for 10 years. Conley said, I'm going to help you get land. And we had to do our first campaign. And he called a man by the name of Dick Zigman, who heard me speak. You ready for what are the odds story? This was year 8. He heard me speak one time in year 2 at Pueblo Middle School and leaned over to his wife that day and said, someday we got to help this young man get land. What are the odds? Come on, what are the odds? And he called Dick, and Dick met me on his last piece of land that he had. He'd given away so many pieces of land. And he tore up a contract to Safeway Groceries for $2.4 million. And he said, this is your land. I go, what do I have to do? He said, $100. I wrote the fastest $100 check I've ever read. Come on, people, what are the odds? What are the odds? And Dick Zigman helped us get that land. Would you throw up that picture of Mountain Park? We've been in a school for 10 years when God gave us this. Listen, say with me, God is doing it again. Come on. God is doing it again. He's doing it in Marietta, Ohio. And 70 families, look at me, 70 families. We were not huge. 70 families committed $770,000. $770,000 in 1 year to help us borrow against the property and build this first facility. Don't put the other one up, it doesn't really matter. I'll tell them that story later. God helped us build that first building, and he's doing it again. Now, I want you to bow your heads with me. Would you bow your heads with me? Well, before you do, look up one more time. I'm just going to tell you this real quick, because this is going to help you. Because you're thinking, how can we do that? Well, we had to realize that God had blessed us, okay? So let me just remind you that 30% of the world is malnourished, okay? 30%. Let me throw out 30% of these. 30% of the world is malnourished. And only 40% will finish high school, 40%. And 50% will go to bed hungry and not have their needs met. And 80% will never have decent housing. And 90% will never go to college. And only 1% will live like we do here in Marietta or Phoenix and have maybe a six-figure salary or maybe been gifted many things. And only 1% will ever have a secondary degree like a master's or a doctor or whatever. 1%. And I just want you to know that if you pray, God can use the 1%. Now, we didn't have a gift bigger than $35,000, but 70 families committed $770,000. And God helped us build our first building and get land. I want you to bow your heads. And all I want to ask you today, I want you to make a big commitment. Ready? It's to pray this week. Will you pray every day? Will you pray every day about what God could use you to do for this dream to happen again here in Marietta, Ohio? I tell you what, with every head bowed and eye closed, would you just raise your hand if you'll agree to pray? Just agree to pray, because God will tell you what to do. Hands up. Come on, put your hand up if you say, yeah, I'll pray this week. Awesome. You people are awesome. Let me pray for you. God, you're doing it again. What are the odds that someday we're just going to tell story after story after story, not about money, but about Zacchaeuses that come to Christ, about young people that find Jesus, like at Hot Church at our place. Lord, that you just will chase people around the world, like Paul T., because you love them so much. You'll chase them up a tree. You'll ask them to come down from a tree. You'll do whatever it takes to say, this is where life is found in me. We pray that you'll do this in Jesus' name. And would you honor everyone who said they would pray in Jesus' name.